be chill. If you have silly comments to make, if you want to sing and dance in the middle, only Vasu is allowed to do that. All others will have to mute ourselves if you want to sing or dance. So uh, that's what I have to say about it. Okay, apparently we're live on YouTube now, you guys. Good evening, everyone. This is season 4, episode 3 of Lawyers, Artists, and Others Talk Law, Love, and Equity. Thanks, Vasu, for that dance. That's exactly what we were waiting for. We began this evening. So, this series is broadcast media, which is inspired by a love for beauty and love for wisdom. We feel like we don't have enough media in our day-to-day life that addresses either of these things, and that's quite a pity. And so that said, what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about freedom. We've just celebrated Independence Day. So I suppose all other days are Dependence Days, including today, August 23rd, 2020, where anything is possible. I mean, it's going to be possible tomorrow as well, but today it's especially possible to talk about freedom. So we'll do a quick round of introductions, and for people who have been victims of this exercise before, you know what's about to come. And I'll start with you guys. We're going to do a round of introductions. We're going to ask you to introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you're coming from, because we have the next 1.5 hours to do that. So, Abhay, can I start with you as hopefully a willing supplicant in this exercise?
Sure. So I am an unfinished product, and I am someone who is constantly questioning who I am. So lots of confusion and lots of revelation, and expanding the relationship between I and the non-I becomes nature and I for me, usually. So whenever Badri asks me this question, given that I'm a workaholic, it becomes impossible to answer him if I speak for longer than 45 seconds. But that's broadly my sense of who I am.
You know, this Abhay, the great thing about this show is somehow or the other, this exercise distills into having workaholics and people who like sleeping in, all waking up super early, participating, you know. And I suppose that's just perfect, you know, because either way we think about what we have to think about. So to reveling and revelation, thanks Abhay for entertaining us once again. Speaking of entertainment, Mr. Vasu Dixit, retainment, entertainment, and everything else in between.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Vasu Dixit.
Vasu, can you say that in Kannada, please?
Hello, namaskara. Nanu Vasu Dixit.
Can you say it in Telugu now?
Naku Vasu Dixittu.
Other languages that require sufficient context and explanation for this moment.
Maja Vasu Dixit tha.
It's amazing. Now you're going to start using languages whose names I don't know, and soon enough you're going to be using like binary code to express who you are.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything else about yourself, Vasu?
I have a guru who is his name is Nanalla. Nanalla in Kannada means it's not me. So I am a ardent disciple of him, and so sometimes whatever I write by his name. So I am that, which is it's not me.
Wow.
So I am that. Whatever I am is not me. So I am actually nothing. So when I sing, it's not me. When I create something, it's not me. When I write, it's not me. So end of the day, when we die, it's not us. It's not us who's left this body, whom we think that we are. It's not that. So I think that defines me, that I am nothing.
Vasu, you are a very, very clever man, because now I have to shift that on your head and say that when you die so that all of us can live. And when you die, all of us die along with you. So we all live for you a little bit. So thanks for making it. And thanks for picking up the parcel that was passed on by Abhayraj so cleverly. Gaurav is making his thoughtful face. So Gaurav, I have to say hi.
I'm not sure how to follow up on each of these introductions
You
with
just have to say your
anything particularly profound. So it's yeah, I mean, I'm Gaurav, I guess. It's and I guess it is difficult for me to introduce myself without talking about like what I do or where I come from. So I think maybe that says something about the
why,
world that we live in.
why is
So
everyone insisting on this, like being something that you are not and being there for all of yourselves? This is very confusing. So like as a viewer or as a listener, am I supposed to tune into you or the not of you? Like what am I going to do? It's
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You kind of caught me off guard there. So I mean, I'm going to pass the baton now. So
is there someone you want to pass the baton to? I'll let you pick.
Niyati or Disha?
This one option at a time. Gaurav.
Okay, yeah, okay. Niyati then.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi, Gaurav. Hi, guys. Yeah, nothing deep or profound to say here. And last two meetings, I think you guys have made me think a lot about how to describe myself. But I am out. I think I'm just going to repeat it. I really like chips, wafers, potato chips. None of those electronic chip thingies that Badri asked me about, which I didn't get anything. And I like plants. I am terrible with directions. I can't drive. That's all.
I don't know if you're atypical or completely stereotypical, but like, chips included. It's good. It's good to have you here again, Niyati. Last time, I think you also expressed a profound love for insects. So I suppose that extends to all of life. So thanks for bringing that. At least some part of it. And Disha, as the earliest riser in this time zone, you want to say hi, hello. Thanks for joining us, first of all, with less than no notice. You got, I think, full notice, a little less notice than Gaurav. I'm not quite sure.
That's okay. I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to say. I'm coming from a giving job interviews for the past 3 months kind of environment. So all I do is talk about my work and try and sell that side of myself. So okay, something. I don't know. I'm Disha and I've gotten a lot of hate in my life for not liking mangoes despite being from India is all I can come up with. Yeah.
Is it something specific against mangoes? Are you a fan of mango lassi? Or is it
No, I don't like anything mango at all.
lassi? Or
No.
oh
I
my,
also don't like milk, so I mean milk products.
it makes sense. So clearly you're anti. It sounds like a
Yeah.
probiotic kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Nisha, you're here as like the mother of all freedom / Nina. I'm not quite sure, but it's a great look. You want to say hi?
Hi everyone, I'm Nisha Abdullah, or am I? No, I'm just taking on from Abhay and Vasu. That was the most fun I've had listening to people introduce themselves. I wish I had something as clever, but no. I love coffee, hate tea with milk. I hate tea with milk, and that makes life in the theater a little difficult. I'm currently doodling and learning how to convince people that my stick figures are worthy of their attention. Yeah, the last 2 days have been fantastic. Met some really interesting people and very passionate people, and I feel like I'm going to be talking to them and getting to know them a lot over hopefully next couple of weeks, maybe. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, really.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nisha Abdullah, Sinbad the Sailor Woman, and I don't know, Alibaba and 41 Thieves, all of them in one. It's wonderful to have you here, Nisha. You've been super thoughtful and you're here as a maker of theater and you've appeared theatrically. So that's just about perfect. And speaking of theatrical appearances, the queen of all theatrical appearances is Rohini. Rohini, you want to say hi, hello, before we kick off proceedings?
Hi, everyone. I'm feeling superbly underdressed after that kind of introduction. Uh, you might or might not be able to tell, but I am in bed. And if this session gets extremely boring, I fully intend to switch off and say, oh no, bad bandwidth. And this is a method that has worked for me several times. Don't tell anyone. Uh, but actually, I think we had an extraordinarily interesting and not long enough session yesterday, and I very much want to see what happens today, and I want to see where we take this. So I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very glad I got the invitation, and I'm even more glad that I said yes, even though I didn't know what I was getting.
But Rohini, here's the thing. We've had to try very hard to get you to say yes. But once you said yes, you've only said yes again and again and again. And I have to say, it's actually been true for everyone here. All of you have been close friends or far friends in some way or the other. I mean, brothers and sisters from other mothers and fathers. But Rohini, I just want to say that you didn't have to do anything because you came perfect. So so obviously you have to be in bed. Obviously you have to look as you do. And obviously the contrast has to add up as it does. So I guess that works out perfectly. We have one hidden Aishwarya here. Aishwarya, are you ready to say hi? Do you want to say hi later? No, Aishwarya.
Hi.
You're ready for
Sorry, you've just caught me at a I am. You've just caught me at a bad time because I'm also sort of on the side filling my passport renewal form, which is I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, because like I've run out of time, and I'm also sort of shifting places in COVID, so like everybody, like all that anxiety is just coming down on me. But yes, I will give like a small sly introduction, which is that I like tea. I like tea time snacks, and like I like talking about constitution and ideas around constitution concepts. This was something new for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it because like people took the pressure off. I think that's more important for me than anything else. So yeah, that's me.
That's perfect, Aishwarya. And I just want to say that Just Learning also doubles as a passport and immigration office. So if you have admission consultancy work required, we are really good at it. We've helped a lot of people, except ourselves, go to university. I mean, maybe one day we will as well. But that said, if you need passport processing help, relationship advisors for visa processing, you know who to call. Call 108, I guess that's an ambulance, I don't know, or 100, whichever is necessary to reach out to us. But guys, thank you so much for coming here. We have a couple of other hidden participants. We're going to call them the unholy ghosts. These unholy ghosts I'm going to share my screen for a moment. So these unholy ghosts have actually prepared a very, very useful slide deck for us to just contextualize our chat. So let me just shift to that for one moment. Make it appear and then do the needful. One sec. Oh my God, it's making me do many other things that I was not prepared to do just yet. Sorry. Okay, guys. So as I get that figured out, let's just start with the first context to our conversation. And what we're going to do today is talk some more about freedom. We want to keep talking about freedom because we feel like most of the time we speak about what it means not to be free, and that's quite a pity. That's really not how it should be. And we feel like the perfect combination of people to talk about freedom, unfreedom, justice, injustice, because we have a great mix of art and heart and justice and injustice and constitutional and unconstitutional folks. There's a unifying theme to all of this, and that's something that I had the privilege of exploring with Gaurav over many, many years and many states of abbreviation and lack of it, which is this fundamental idea of republicanism. Right? We say India is a sovereign, socialist, democratic republic, secular, of course. Right? I'm not very sure whether we should say so or not, because the constitution makers always assumed we were secular. If we divided ourselves, I suppose we have ourselves to blame as opposed to the constitution necessarily, right? Republicanism is based on the idea that it has three fundamental constituent elements. The first one is that freedom is only freedom if it's free of domination. And the second idea is that freedom is relevant. I mean, someone who's living as a slave on a street is going to be more free than, say, someone who has a benevolent slave owner, right? Because your freedom is conditional on the person who's giving you that freedom. And that's the second element of republicanism. And the third element of republicanism is civics, which unfortunately for us was the most boring subject we could have ever studied in school. And I suppose that's what we're stuck with. But that said, all of this is premised on the idea that constitution is nothing without constitutionalism, civics is nothing without civic education and civic participation, right? So all of these three things go together. The idea of civic agency, the idea of citizenship, the idea of being a member of a republic. And that's really what unifies all of us and this exercise under this broad banner of justice. And just learning, of course, is motivated in doing anything we can to increase the amount of justice there is in the world, including visa and passport applications. So that said, you know who to call for this with this purpose. I'm going to retire this joke immediately because I feel like it's only distracting from the usefulness of the conversation. Please don't nod so vigorously. It's very jarring, guys. But okay, that said, we'll begin with a quick introduction from the four of our experts for the evening, and to talk about what freedom means to them. And I'd invite all of you to talk about freedom from this perspective of, what does it mean for you to feel free, and what do you think it means for someone else to feel free, right? So we'll start with the four experts who haven't been part of the conversation so far, and then we can go back to the facilitators who worked with several super enthusiastic participants to come up with some funky ideas that we are shortly going to implement. But Gaurav, can we start with you? Do you want to talk about what freedom means to you and what you think it means for someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think republicanism is an interesting framework to think through the kind of conditions which need to exist, or what are the preconditions that are necessary in order for somebody to be able to exercise freedom. And I think that it's interesting to think about it in different kinds of domains and in different areas of one's life and permeating through different areas of society. So I think that there's an idea of political, let's try and think of it as like social, legal, and political, and I think each of these sort of blend in with one another, and they interact with society at large, and this sort of permeates down to the individual as well. And so when I think of it through this particular kind of stratification, I think at the social level, for me at least, there's we as citizens need to exercise a certain degree of political agency in order for us to be able to create a set of conditions which enable freedom. So when we are voting, when we're participating as an active citizenry, we are contributing to conditions which allow us to be free. And I think this sort of goes to show that all of these three things are very intricately linked. And I think the Constitution is an interesting way to think through some of these things, but it, I think, at all times remains an enabler, and it doesn't constrain our choices, but it guides them. But at all times, it's a good way to think through it. But I think that there's a lot more than which the Constitution tells us. But I think that we as a polity, we need to think more clearly about what it means to have constitutionalism and freedom permeate at all levels. And I think this is a good forum to think through some of these things. And yeah, so that's what it means for me.
That's amazing, Gaurav, because like the thing that I'm immediately getting from it is the idea that freedom is nothing till you insist upon it and then find sources to validate it socially, legally, politically, constitutionally, more than anything else. The constitution is the weak constitution of the self under the constitution of a nation, right? And so obviously it's a living document. How can it be any other way but that? And for you to tie it back into living and day-to-day life, I think is really what we need more of, insisting on some more freedom so we can have some more freedom.
It's also interesting because I just sort of like, just to get back to, because I mean the place where I am at the moment, I live in Budapest, and it's very interesting to think through the kind of transformations that Hungary went through post the fall of the Soviet Union, and how that kind of echoes in some ways the kind of changes that we went through post independence and the creation of citizens. So because there's a whole live debate about how Hungary is currently under an authoritarian, and ostensibly an authoritarian government. And one of the reasons that a lot of political scientists and anthropologists seem to agree on is that post 1991, you had a set of subjects and you failed to create an active citizenry who were going to have an equal sort of investment in the betterment of the republic to try and be participative in politics. And I think that I've been in this country for 4 years now almost. And it's been interesting to see the kind of changes that it's gone through. It's become more and more authoritarian. And there are reasons for hope, because I think what had happened in the period following the fall of communism, there was just a very sort of the elites in this country were clearly there was this deep sense of continuity with the political elite, without the idea of the middle classes and the ordinary man on the street not being adequately informed of or not having an active part to play in the politics of this country. And I think that there are some parallels. Of course, we don't want to stretch the comparison too much, but
Gaurav, I get where you're taking this, and I just pass on the baton. I'll tell you, I'll say why, because, once again, the idea that you see, like you're in Budapest, you haven't given up on your Indian citizenship to be in Budapest, right? And it's impossible.
Not yet. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all live and streaming right now. So I suppose not yet and always be a maybe is always perfect answer. But Gaurav,
I can be the Akshay Kumar of constitutionalism at all times.
Dude, you need a transplant for that. Listen, Gaurav,
no, I'm just joking. I'm being facetious, but yes. Sorry.
Transplant or a workout, both of them work just fine. But that said, Gaurav, what I'm taking from dude, you do have the sense of style of a Bollywood actor or a Hollywood actor or a Hungarian actor. So there's no question about it. What character you're playing, we're not yet sure. Could be a professor or a villain. One man's citizen is another man's terrorist. So it's the Constitution is an interesting document because there are it insists on a point of continuity from one kind of justice to another kind of justice, and a point of discontinuity from one kind of injustice to another kind of injustice, right? So if we had like Panji and Gondwana land when the earth first came together, and we've just been surrounded by water, it's almost like global norms are coming together to coagulate as we move from country to country, And I like this idea that there's a universal sisterhood of traveling half pants in this exercise. So this is, I'm happy to hear that. And speaking of mirroring this, Vasu, I want to ask you about your experience dealing with the same kind of confusions within the country, because I know that you're always, you sing in so many languages. And the reason we asked you to introduce yourself was because art is art, right? It doesn't matter. You could sing it in binary if you wanted to. In fact, that's what you do when you make music. And you're sitting in your studio. Nobody else knows this, for instance, because they might not notice that those are not just patterns, but like foam walls, so that sound doesn't bounce too much within that room, so you can hear clearly, right? And so I want to ask you how you feel about modulating yourself as an artist, singing in so many different languages at a time when it's not necessarily clear uh, what the right politics are. Do you have to insist on not being yourself if you want to find yourself? Is that what's happening? You want to talk about that journey and what it's been like over the last few years, along with, of course, the lengthening and shortening of your hair over time. Vasu, you need to unmute yourself, Vasu.
So just to start with, I'll begin with the song. Is that okay?
Can it be more okay than that? I'm not even going to say yes.
सुनने वाले सारे भक्तजनों से विनती है कि सब अपने माइक्स को अनम्यूट कर दें। जी हाँ, सब अपने माइक्स को अनम्यूट कर दें।
So please, guys, the sound's going to bounce back to Vasu. Unmute your mics.
जब मैं दोबारा ये लाइन गाऊंगा तो आप बोलेंगे जय हो जय हो, ठीक है? यीशु अल्लाह और कृष्णा, बोलो जय हो
जय हो जय हो।
चलो अभी म्यूट कर दीजिए और बस सुनिएगा। यीशु अल्लाह और कृष्णा, कौन भगवान है अपना? यीशु अल्लाह और कृष्णा, कौन भगवान है अपना? फूल पे फूल चढ़ा दे, दिए पे दिए जला दे। फूल पे फूल चढ़ा दे, दिए पे दिए जला दे। माला पे माला जपना, माल को अंदर करना। यीशु अल्लाह और कृष्णा, कौन भगवान है अपना? यीशु अल्लाह और कृष्णा। संत कबीर ने देखा था कि सपना, जहां पर आया कोई नहीं, जो भी है अपना। ये बरसों की बात नहीं है, ये कल की ब्रेकिंग न्यूज भी नहीं है, मगर याद है कि संत कबीर आए धरती पे। कुछ ऐसे नौजवान हैं जो पूछते हैं, बाबा ये संत कबीर कौन था? अरे संत कबीर कौन था? संत कबीर वो था जिसकी वाणी थी ज्ञान की गगरिया। संत कबीर वो था जिसने अपने दोहों से मानवता का धर्म समझाया। तो आज कबीर के बारे में कुछ बोलेंगे, कुछ गाएंगे और जूम सेशन में थोड़ा रंग जमाएंगे। तो संत कबीर आए धरती पे और बोले 500 साल में कुछ खास नहीं बदला। जीने के लिए जो जरूरी है वो श्वास नहीं बदला। पोशाक बदली है पर इंसान नहीं बदला। डर वही है, डर का सामान कहीं बदला। पहले चलती थी तलवार की धार, अब चलती है गोलियों की बौछार। 500 साल में कुछ खास नहीं बदला है। आप तो जानते हैं पिछले जमाने में सीता मैया और द्रौपदी बहना के स्वयंवर हुआ करते थे। आजकल राहुल भैया, राखी बहना और मल्लिका मोहतरमा के स्वयंवर हुआ करते हैं। तो 500 साल में कुछ खास नहीं बदला है। जी हाँ, पिछले जमाने में रावण को लंका में जाके उसको हरा के सीता मैया को वापस लिए जाए हैं। आजकल मंदिर और मस्जिद को तोड़ के उनको हरा के फिर से मंदिर और मस्जिद को बनाते हैं। तो 500 साल में कुछ खास नहीं बदला है। इसीलिए तो मैं कहता हूँ, दिन में तो सब है ज्ञानी, अरे साधो, दिन में तो सब है ज्ञानी और रात में चोर की नानी। ख्याल को अंदर करना यीशु रे अल्लाह रे कृष्णा रे अल्लाह रे यीशु रे अल्लाह रे कृष्णा रे बोला यीशु अल्लाह कृष्ण की
This, Vasu, with this just learning exercise, we say we want to make love and justice inevitable, and we should just call ourselves Vasu Dixit instead. Can we please be the Vasu Dixit collective, if you let us? This, sorry to put you on the spot, Vasu, but man, you're such a beautiful soul. It's so nice to have you here every time. Each time you land up, you just feel better about being human, and it's not easy to feel that way these days. And the idea that you speak your truths with the language of Kabir, in your language, referring back to Kabir, referring back to the masjid or the mandir, all of it put together just makes it seem like, yeah, what else can you have besides love? I mean, really, that's all there is to it. Who cares about constitution, law, civics, this, that? I mean, all of that will take care of itself. You just have to keep making more art. And Vasu, please, I mean, your existence is art enough. So please keep doing more and more of whatever you're doing. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's really, I mean, it's a deep privilege before and after. It was a pleasure. I'm not even sure which one comes first, anymore. I suppose they have to go together. You mean thank you, same to you?
No. Can I say something?
Yes, please, by all means.
So, yeah, thank you for such a long thank you. And so for me, freedom is just this: to be able to express whatever I feel like, and to be able to spread message of love and peace everywhere. And why I sang this particular song is we take the context of what's happening right now and to kind of put it in front of the audience and have a dialogue about it. For example, like here, what I did right now is something I did on the spot, like bringing in the whole Mandir Masjid thing. And because this is something that I have not done before, right? So the example of taking what has been happening 500 or 1000 years before is still true. And that's what Kabir spoke about. He spoke about love and peace 500 years back, and it still holds true today. And people have been still fighting about who Kabir belongs to. And that's the irony of the whole, of the truth that he spoke. So why again I'm coming back to the song is that one of our fans, listeners, love this song, and he was listening to this song. I mean, he was humming this song in his college in a corridor and walking along. The principal heard this song, and he called the student, "What song are you singing?" And then he said, "This is the song Yeshu Allah Krishna." And I mean, it's just a coincidence that he was in a Christian college, and the principal confiscated his ID card and suspended him for a couple of days. And just because he was singing this song, which actually means that all these gods that we name, that we've given, is all equal and all peace. So to be able to speak our hearts and minds out becomes against law, or it becomes a crime.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vasu, I'm just thinking, you said Yeshu Allah or Krishna. I could say Raghupati, Raghava, Raja, Ram. Either way, we are unified under the 10 rupee note with Gandhi on it, right? Or Ambedkar and the Constitution. And like, that's what I'm taking from you, which is that it's okay. You can believe people when they say they want to be free, so long as you're not hurting someone else's capacity to be free. There's no need for that kind of violence. And funnily enough, this is from Topi Wala, isn't it? I've seen you perform this song live so many times now. And now I'm wondering which Topi Wala are you referring to? And what kind of topis are you wearing? Because like now I can't tell. This time you're wearing this topi with your hair. And the next time, I don't know, you might be bald. You might have like huge extensions, a horse costume, jumping up and down. you know. So this is, I really respect your freedom, Vasu. I hope you have more and more of it. Thank you for being
Yeah.
here again.
Thank
And Disha, can I draw your attention to this question? Because I want to ask you now, you said you've been working on job interviews all of these days, and that mustn't be a nice feeling, because all of a sudden you have to explain why you're valid and why your existence has to be validated by someone else for something you've always believed in, right? And we are just waiting for the first person who believes your story. That's really what is happening right now. And so I want to ask you what it is that you've learned about freedom that you think everyone should know. You know, it could be from your experience of the fact that you've changed your lighting right now, or the fact that you care deeply for art or music or everything else. And this is what I remember from our conversation a couple of years ago at a friend's birthday party. And a dear friend who actually brought you here today, right? Mr. Vineet Krishna from CLPR, whom several others here also know, the Center for Law and Policy Research. Vineet leads the civic education projects at the Center for Law and Policy Research. He's been instrumental to building things like a search engine for Constituent Assembly debates, for setting up quizzes with the Constitution, with walnut quizzing solutions. Actually, it's just a bunch of friends who've been doing this a long while. And Disha, it's lovely to be part of the same extended desolation or constellation of, low-key superstars, speaking like in the spirit of Vasu. So do you want to tell us what you've learned about freedom that you think everyone should know? Let's start by unmuting yourself.
Thought that was the thing. So I worked as a lawyer and I've engaged with the law side of things. But I think for me, when I think about what freedom means to me, it's a more personal experience, understanding of the concept. And I mean, from a very young age, I feel like we're not encouraged to challenge authority as much here. You're just conditioned into giving in, be it parental authority, teachers at school, bosses at work, etc. So I feel like I keep coming back to this point over and over again. This, like you said, the need to sell yourself or your story and for someone to think it's good enough. I feel like in that position itself, you already compromised on your idea of freedom to a certain extent, because you're buying into someone else's concepts or ideas of what makes an ideal candidate, be it for a job or an ideal partner, etc. And I see that happen a lot more now in terms of political authority, where forget the fact that we don't challenge somebody else's position of power over us, but we've also started imposing some sort of a self-censorship, be it online, fearing trolls and haters and all of the cancel culture that's going on social media, or otherwise with friends, etc. Just this need to blend in and do it at the cost of giving up the things that you would ideally want to do but make you stand out or challenge norms. So I think the biggest takeaway for me has been that, I mean, I would feel that someone possesses a certain degree of freedom when they do have the opportunity or the platform or the space to be able to act outside of the normative style of things and be allowed to do it without being reprimanded for it or being, I don't know, shortchanged in a different way. So yeah, even with the job experience, I think it's a very similar thing. Or in any walk of life, the one thing that I would say I have learned is that not to second guess yourself just because you're not playing into some mainstream idea of something or the popularized notion of any aspect of life, that is, be it art, be it politics, be it having an opinion and sticking to it, not giving into it just because everyone else seems to be going the other way. So if you have the space to do that, I would say that's an inclination of a relatively free space, as opposed to what we grew up, at least in my family in India and a lot of other families I know. And then we tend to carry that forward in our lives professionally and personally, is this whole idea of obedience. We value obedience a little too much over actually standing up and, objective things or being critical of things. Being critical is often seen as being disobedient or negative or trying to be an outlier for all the wrong reasons. So yeah.
Okay, I mean, Disha, that's such a beautiful answer. I'm so happy that you found the kindness necessary to accept yourself and thereby also accept the fundamental truth that if you have freedom, you have to insist on it, And
Yep.
that's how pride and privilege can go together. If you don't have pride, you have privilege. So you have to be proud. No, please don't be proud, at least enjoy your privilege and know it. And remember that enabling someone else's pride so that it elevates into privilege is your constitutional duty and your unconstitutional duty as a human, if I were to think of your civic obligations. So Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Disha, and that too for like this level of honesty on a live stream in the middle of the morning, sitting.
And I guess Vineet's going to bear the brunt of all of this someday.
Someday. Or let's hope it's good. I have no doubt about it. Like it's going to be quite fine. And speaking of good karma, I have to invite my dear friend Abhayraj. I feel stupid, like I'm saying it in an email introduction. My dear friend Abhayraj Naik. But, like I've always thought of Abhay as this embodiment of someone who has the way to associate with nature and circumstance almost as a tribal does, in a way that there's a continuity between how he lives and how he loves and who he lives with and who he works with and how he works with. And I've always really admired his integrity. And Abhay, as always, it's a deep privilege to work with you. And what I'll do, Abhay, is just share my screen right now. We've made a little overview of all the things that have come up over the weekend. And so it's a little intro to what these things are about. And can I just recommend that perhaps you speak of what you think the freedom of speech and expression and the freedom of assembly and association means to you, and then as we go along, we can invite the facilitator of each panel to take us through their version of it. Yeah, is that okay, Abhay?
Sounds good, Badri. Happy to. As I promised, I'm going to go with the flow. So the river will flow and I will go with that flow. I think also having had the chance to listen to folks who went before me, I would like to in some ways reference what each one of them, starting from Gaurav and then Vasu's beautiful song along with his comments and Disha's comments as well, sort of raised in me. And your introduction also, just the idea of republicanism, I think it's important to bring in the French thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the sort of over-famous line of, and a bit of a man-centric line, man everywhere is born free, but every man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains, which is identified by many folks as the center of his thinking on the social contract, of which the Constitution is a clear form, a social contract that constitutes a republic or constitutes a nation state or constitutes a legal order. So my own sense of freedom of speech and expression and freedom of assembly for the longest time related to anger or frustration against what I perceived as the unjust exercise of power. And it was always reactive in the sense of my freedom or other people's freedoms, be those artists who are pushing the limits of expression or minorities who are having their way of life infringed upon. It was a defense against totalitarianism or authority for a good part of my life. And I think it's only in recent times that I just decided to let go of my constitutional law and my legal training and also my habitus of living with the and mostly communicating with legal thinkers to really step back and reappraise what freedom, both in the sense of speech and expression and assembly, might mean. So I have only speculative thoughts, but I think one dimension of it is definitely the absence of fear, which kind of speaks to both what Disha and Gaurav explored in their own ways, and also speaks to what Vasu did, which is just like, hey, I'm going to play a song here, never mind. I'm not afraid to just sing out. And I guess it helps if you're a super musician in that sense. But this absence of fear by itself is also a bit dangerous, because I might have no fear, and that means that I can just like pull out a shotgun and go boom, boom, and shoot everyone and do whatever I want to. So the slide into madness and anarchy is very close from an absence of fear. So the second leg, if you wish, of freedom for me is also a constant emergence of life, both at an individual level and at a community level, in as beautiful or perfect or robust a form it can be. So this idea of perpetually emerging, having the ability to not be controlled, to be unboxed, to be floating, to be like a free river is a flowing river, is an undammed river, right? And that is an emergence that it's always in movement. So no fear and constantly uh, emerging into a better form of oneself together constitute freedom for me. And I think I have a Sanskrit term, Siddhi Swarupa, which funnily enough in English is translated into a perfection of one's constitutional position, right? So Abhay keeps perfecting himself according to his own choice is a very liberal word, but according to his own karma or destiny, if you wish, in that sense, but also according to what he thinks is best for him. And the structures around me, the control, the authority, and the insecurities cannot limit that constant emergence of a person in that sense. So I don't want to say more than that at this stage, Badri and friends. I think that's the expansive sense in which I think of freedom now, with absence of fear and the ability to constantly emerge to a more beautiful, a more loving, or a more perfect form of oneself. And if both of these existed in our constitutional societies, I think the world would be a very beautiful place, because you'd really see I have to invoke the philosopher Nietzsche. You'd see superhumans doing superhuman thingies, instead of the drudgery and the chained forms of life that we see around us.
Abhay, you've literally described all the reasons why I find myself endlessly fascinated by your existence, because the coincidences are hilarious. Just yesterday, I was thinking about Nietzsche's idea where he says, "We whose duty is wakefulness itself," right? And he has this analogy of a planet disappearing and then you having to decide whether you want to hold yourself together or come apart. Either way is okay, because it comes apart or goes apart anyway. And most people don't realize that nihilism is a story of hope. And this is the same story for Rousseau as well. You see, Rousseau wrote a book called Emile, which we have discussed before, where he teaches little children how to be constitutional participants, right, in the social contract that he determines. And then you're back to talking about joy and flow, and it reminds me of like philosophical ideas which are older than Socrates, at least in the Western philosophy, and clearly rooted in Sanskrit as well. The idea that no man steps into the same river twice. And of course, it's a man-centric worldview, because they imagine that women couldn't step into rivers. It's quite stupid. Or they imagine that women were mermaids. Both of them could be equally valid, I feel. But that said, I find this fascinating, Abhay, because you've spoken of justice as a matter of something that seeks balance, which might appear imbalance, but seeks balance at all moments, where even at a moment of imbalance, it is the thing that holds us together. It just is. And I like the fact that it just is as it is right now. So with this, Abhay, should I recommend that we move into each of the panels? And Rohini, are you around? Can I call on you to speak about your panel? But I want to specifically contextualize your intervention on this on the basis of your participation in online movements for now a couple of decades, right? Some people are born in incubators, you were born on the internet, and you continue to flourish there and in real life. So it would be lovely for you to tell us about what the freedom of speech and association online specifically means to you.
Like me personally.
Oh yes, of course. And therefore also talk about what you think you picked up from the conversations. It's really not so much about covering every aspect of the conversation, but being able to present what you discussed. And Rohini, I know you were with Aishwarya on this panel. So Aishwarya, feel free to step in anytime you want. The only reason I didn't call on you just yet is because we wanted facilitators who were working on association or speech, either online or offline, and reflect back through Abhay to any one of our other experts tonight. So I'm just starting with you, Rohini, but we can go around the room as we speak.
My internet has been pretty spotty, by the way, so I apologize in advance if I fall off. For me personally, the internet has been a space where people who otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to speak out about themselves, and specifically right now, I'm talking about the queer community, but I think this applies to many other communities who previously were unheard or kept silent. But to be queer and to meet queer people in person is an incredible luxury and joy and miracle. And to meet queer people worldwide online is a different kind of joy and miracle and learning. Because I think one of the things that has happened online was that even if you're looking at big entities like Facebook, where there might be many issues regarding privacy, regarding dignity, all of those things, because these platforms existed, we were able to find and make quiet groups where we spoke with each other before 377. Before 377 was decriminalized, like the first time in 2009. And then again, after the 2013 judgment, where it was, I forget what the technical term is, but when it was reinstated, as it were, a lot of the work that happened, a lot of the living that happened online. Facebook makes it very difficult to be private on the platform, but people have worked at it and tried at it. Places like Reddit. Again, I'm not saying that none of these places are. I'm not saying that any of these places are pure of whatever it is you want it to be pure for. But the freedom of expression dovetails quite a lot with the freedom of assembly. The freedom of expression dovetails with however you want to express art and your reverence for art. So whether you're talking fan fiction or homages to other artistic spaces. So I don't actually think of myself as an activist for freedom of expression. I just happen to be one of those people who's been talking about being queer with men, trans women, cis men, cis women, all of whom one way or another were in some degree of danger, not just from the law, but from mainstream society. And that danger might be rejection, that danger might be violence, that danger might be being reported. So my experience of the internet has been both for the horrors of what it can do, but also for the space it allows you to talk that doesn't exist in RL sometimes, because it allows you to be, if not anonymous, then safe or safely invisible. And I think there are different ways of looking at safety, both online and in real life. And some spaces are safe where online, and some spaces are safer in real life. But I don't think of myself, so I've never actually gone out and campaigned for free speech or for freedom of assembly. But I have, by being in these communities and by being with these people, by reading fan fiction, which has been my touchstone for the last 2 or 3 days. I have benefited from the fact that these freedoms, in one way or another, exact freedom, in a that allowed me to have ability and allowed me to exercise it in turn. Very broadly, I think we will say that in have time make a beginning. Aishwarya will tell you that it's safe to say that we had more questions. Hello?
Yeah. No, Rohini, you're here.
Sorry. Aishwarya will tell you that we had more questions than we had answers. Broadly, we talked about... Hello?
Rohini, sorry. I was just about to say that the internet gods are sucking the bandwidth out of your day-to-day life. And it's a pity because you've always insisted on freedom, not by campaigning for freedom, but just being free, starting online and going offline. But I believe you were trying to call on Aishwarya to speak of the kinds of questions you raised yesterday. So Aishwarya, you want to take over from there and talk about the 3 or 4 things that
Yes.
came up yesterday?
Yes. I think
Sure, sure.
thank
Hey, no problem. Thanks for speaking, though.
Right. So, I mean, like I explained to you guys yesterday, we had sort of, tried to not be in this dichotomy of, like, what are the pros and what are the cons. And if you would see like our cloud, our word cloud, the biggest word that sort of popped out from there is, community. We believe that like a community, like an empathetic community was a requirement definitely to sort of make online behavior better for everyone. But a lot of questions were not explored. I think the fact that how every community begins to exclude somebody or the other. Questions of whether everybody in that community wants to be included in that community or not. Questions that like how does one really form morality around that community, who gets to dictate that morality, considering we've seen that most of discourse online has been hegemonized by one type of social identity or political identity. And Rohini came from a different background. I came from a space where I really wanted to see how facts were being, really like it's not a subversion. I think facts were just packaged. I mean, lies were being packaged as facts online, like by mostly these online trolls, the huge troll army, etc. There are like uh, really huge consequences to bullying, like cancel culture, etc., etc. The scope was really wide. We didn't really come together to some sort of like consensus on anything. The questions that did come up were, like I had already sort of highlighted. Who gets to form that community? How do you get to form that community? Um, how organic is it supposed to be? How organized is it supposed to be? Say, what are these? We'd also touched upon something called community guidelines. I am not very sure how that plays out. Probably people in policy networks are going to be able to, you know, uh, elaborate on that, because I'm also not a freedom of speech activist. Although I mean, like being interested in feminist theory sort of more often than not really makes you go into this question, because mostly everything in freedom of expression or speech, as we think about in the law, has been set out by people who think that it's you know basically impinging on a woman's honor, which is definitely not coming from a woman's voice. It's coming from more often than not a man.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are one of the few things that we just came up with.
This, Aishwarya, it's amazing that you pointed out this way, because the odd thing about lawmaking is that we can only agree at a very high level what we care about. And we think of these things as norms, and the world is all moving to a certain norm of what justice means for all of us as a common heritage of this universe that we all belong to, right? And so, in what really, rather than the fact of your expertise, what I appreciate is that you were willing to have this conversation. And we're going to reflect back on these ideas in just a bit with each of our speakers. And for now, Niyati, can I recommend that you speak about what you learned about the same freedom, the freedom of speech and expression, and the questions that it raised in you? Because you work in hate crimes, right? And you've thought about this a lot, and you've seen it in very violent contexts. You haven't seen it necessarily in the fullness of the joy that Vasu and Abhay might speak of, but all of us are afraid of. But and so you understand that the truths are far more complicated than it seems. But we all agree to the truth because it seems to be nice enough for all of us. And I guess that's what justice is. I'm going to share my screen once again, Niyati, and if you want to just speak about your panel a little bit and the questions it raised in you, perhaps we could do that and then move to the others on our conversation today. Sounds okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, super. So, yeah.
So again, in the very limited time that we had, and we were 4 very enthusiastic people, so we had a lot to talk about. We had a lot to discuss from our experiences from the protest that started in December last year and went on till February. One very interesting thing that one of my co-facilitators said, that it's very important right now to think about what democracy means and what freedom of speech and expression, what role freedom of speech and expression plays in democracy, because the very cliched idea of democracy that gets thrown around, especially in schools when we're in school, is like the elections that happen once in 5 years, and you go vote, and you the idea of a republic, head of the state is chosen, and all of that. So, but also how we need to think about participative democracy, and how that really requires uh, people to value freedom of speech for itself, and especially more so right now from the citizens, because we hear about how curriculum is being slashed and spaces are shrinking, and people are trying to, what Orwell calls newspeak. They're trying to do that, and like freedom of speech and expression in offline spaces, which are also shrinking, because and that's closely related with association, right? Because I like it's a fact well known that after the liberalization in India, people have like the physical spaces have been taken away from people. They don't really organize. They don't come together. We don't know, and the way individualism is really promoted. We often don't even know our neighbors. So so just quickly going over the things that we spoke about yesterday. Yesterday was that how first is that a freedom of speech is, sometimes it's not sometimes it's not really like you're not exposed to a lot of speech, not because it's curbed actively, but also because in a diverse country like India, you're not exposed to it. So more exposure, soft touch cultural approach, which means that like at when you're in educational institutions, you get exposed to art from other communities, other languages, other parts of the country, and that also obviously brings along with itself their lived experiences. Then we spoke at length about what are the physical spaces that where we see freedom of speech and expression playing itself out. So one is definitely media, which is a shit show right now. So we discussed a little bit about, we had a journalist as a facilitator, and she spoke at length about how the corporatization of media means that if they're dependent on ads, people don't really want to pay for good journalism, which is okay. But also then how do you make media independent? That's really important. Then also how we should be looking to protect educational institutes as as spaces where people can really discuss ideas, come up with ideas, say the most radical things, and but also not be criminalized. Universities as safe spaces, and Disha already spoke about it, but yeah, this also we discussed yesterday, that how who curbs our freedom of speech and expression? One is obviously the state, but society plays such a big role. So I'm not even going to think about what the IPC will do to me. That's still like, I mean, at some level that's still a very high standard. But I just wouldn't say anything because my parents don't like it, or I'm scared that if I post something on Facebook, what my relatives might say. That's happened to me, by the way. Like my relatives have screenshotted my Facebook status messages and sent it to my parents saying that like, look at her, what is she writing and all of that. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So society. So how we need to constantly keep challenging the non-state authoritative figures in our lives, and that could be that. And I mean, we have seen some, like, despite all the bleakness that's there in India right now, we've seen some amazing things. Like, there are villages that have come up with anti-boycott norms of their own. There was Patalgadi. I mean, they had an entire like the tribal community there had their entire constitution written on stones, on rocks, and hundreds were charged with sedition. Thankfully, those charges were dropped. But yeah, so how, and at the family level, at RWA level, how we need to constantly keep, like sort of charting out spaces for ourselves where we can express ourselves and just advance the.
Neil, super thoughtful of you. And I think it's almost, it's quite inevitable that you would frame it in this language, I feel, because you've been thinking a lot about what community standards mean, right? And how they operate on our lives. Because that's what defines hate. And if the state hates, you'd call it sedition. If people hate, you call it a hate crime. And it's not quite clear what you're hating, when you're hating. And thanks for presenting in a way that was really quite balanced more than anything else. Disha, I want to call on you to reflect on this idea of how free speech intersects with day-to-day real life, because I'm guessing these are not new thoughts for you, and you've now been in a jurisdiction where the standard of free speech is the opposite of what it is in India. The idea of there being no prior restraints on speaking freely, as opposed to a form where it's important to state all the exceptions to free speech, just so that you're not unfairly targeted by the state, nor are you unfairly targeted by other people. But what happens in a world where we don't agree what definition means? What happens in a world where we don't agree what hate means, what sedition means? And could you reflect on how that's operated in your life? And if it helps, I'll just share the screen here once again. So feel free to speak over it or under it as you see fit.
I think I'm good. Oh no, I'm on not on mute. I'm probably going to go back to what I think Abhay was saying about knowing the state of anarchy and when that sets in. And it's not exactly the same thing, but at least from my experience of witnessing this more individualistic sort of my freedom is my own and I have the right to say what I want understanding of free speech and expression has been more that you have a lot more liberty to say and express as you feel, but there's also as a consequence of that more fear from the other people about reactions. People are constantly policing their own speech a lot more than they would have, because it seems like there's this anxiety surrounding everyone as to what is it that counts for hate speech, or what is it that would fall under protected freedom of speech. So the fact that there are no standards or there's no definition also obviously comes with its own drawbacks, which being that anything and everything you say can be taken to mean positively or negatively. And we've seen that happen a lot on campus, especially here, where students making political statements against the administration, etc., can be stretched to mean that, they were actually challenging authority where there was no occasion to do so, or they're acting against the people in power, and that calls for like lawsuits being filed. It happened very recently with all the protests that happened around the COVID shutdowns in universities. There were a couple of colleges that filed lawsuits against their own students for protesting with respect to the fee hikes and all of that, or no reduction in the expenses given that everything was going remote. So it does, of course, mean that yes, there's this I don't know, the space is wider and anything is and everything is imaginable as free speech and expression, or it's not limited to the way you dress or the way you are engaging with people on and off social media, but also that there are no limits to how much of that speech can be policed by non-state actors as well. Then even that sort of definition goes away, where people interacting on the online space especially, and you see that a lot within the younger generation nowadays now, is you take it as a license to say and do as you please without respecting other people's opinions or taking account of the fact that there may be a different reality that someone else has experienced. And this sort of attitude of, I know best and what I know is all I need to know, and because I have the freedom to do so and think so without engaging with different opinions. So I think that's probably been the biggest difference I've seen in terms of when stretched to those limits, what can it mean to have no definition to what a freedom of speech and expression kind of right would mean.
That's a great summarization of how to think about state and non-state actors, because I think it just comes back to this idea of who governs the online world and who governs the offline world, right? Because somehow we now live in a place where on Facebook, you might be more free or less free depending on where you are. If you're in the US, you could possibly be more free. If you're in India, you might be less free. And it's been quite confusing for us as individuals to know what is what. And I suppose the only thing I'm taking from what you're saying, Disha, in terms of how we can behave as actors is, just be free and then see where it goes from there. And I don't know if that's a sufficient summarization of it, but beyond this, thinking about what it means to give the state primacy and how we think about the primacy of the state seems to be very linked with how we understand who has a right and who doesn't have a right. And which is why questions of citizenship and rights accorded to them seem to become so more important than they might be otherwise. Because the immigration crisis looks similar in the US or India, depending on how much hate there is, right? And policies of assimilation and acceptance look similar depending on whether you're loving or not. And I suppose that applies equally to state and non-state actors. And that's how I'm sort of interpreting what you're saying. I hope that's not entirely inaccurate.
I think it's also, I feel like there's an additional layer that's been added to the restraints to exercising your freedom, and that's self-imposed. We fear our own actions a lot more. Forget the state, forget social context, forget your friends. It's almost like, you're second guessing each move you're making on the digital space, because it could just define your entire existence for that one day or 48 hours or whatever it may be. And that's that, like, you can't take it back. So yes, there is the space to be free, but asserting it's become all the more important now, because it's very easy to just shy away from doing that, owing to the fear that, this is probably going to be the only thing that becomes associated with me, and that will be the end of my story here.
This, somehow we seem to be distilling back to the fundamental truths, which is that the law is not just punishment, but it's also a suggestion, a suggestion to be nicer to each other and whatnot. So this idea of freedom of the next half of what we want to reflect off with the other panelists who are here with us today is about the freedom of assembly and association. And Sumant, one of our facilitators who was the expert in this room, remarked a couple of days back on Friday when we started setting up the context for this conversation. He said, why have you mentioned both assembly and association? Was there a need to mention both assembly and association, or could you have just mentioned one? And we were talking through that session, and it was very clear that to a lawyer, these might be two different things, but to anyone who's not a lawyer, it's really just like a bunch of people coming together and figuring out whether they can come together legitimately or not, right? And that's really all that assembly and association seem to be about. So that's the context for this conversation. And once again, much like we saw with the freedom of speech and expression online and offline, we saw that the questions in all of these rooms seem to mirror the same kind of ideals. So certainly looking at these 4 or 5 slides, you can understand what the Constitution lets you do, what kind of duties you have if you want to be a constitutional actor. And that was the intention of parts of the Constitution, right? Including the fundamental duties for scientific temper. You can't be killing off scientists. You can't be celebrating your religion at the cost of every other religion that exists. You can't be coming together to take something down. You can come together if you want to build something up. And I suppose that's how I'm looking at the theme of these two. And this reflects back to our previous episode on the idea of freedom in the context of Indian rap music. It was a super episode with Smokey the Ghost and Purima Hatti. It happened last week, and anyone who's around should go check it out. We did it right after Independence Week to speak and feel more freely about speech and expression and assembly and association. So, because we don't have the experts with us here, I'm just going to leave it here. But like I was on this panel as well, and for us, the big learning in all of this is that we need to enable people to play, and we need to disable the police. And that's really how we felt about how we thought about assembly and association. And if you can't create, then it's your duty to curate. If you can't love, then it's your duty to share. If you don't love, decide what you want to cancel from your life, because otherwise it seems like we end up canceling all of culture itself instead of restricting or cancellation to a certain way of being as opposed to individuals, right? And that's a true joy of association. And that's really the perspective that we were thinking about here. And we were thinking of the strategies in which we could enable people on the internet, off the internet, to think about how we make playlists, how we enable playfulness, and enjoy the joy of communion. And our words also reflected back this premise here, And we saw a similar thread going towards the offline space, where essentially the focus was on protecting the bodies that assemble together, right? So the question to ask ourselves is Section 144 for the protection of the state, or is it for the protection of the people? And if so, what is a legitimate way to do it and what is not? And those were the kinds of questions that we came up with in this part of the exercise. And I'm going to go back to our panelists once again, because I hope everyone's back with us now. Gaurav, can I start with you? I want to ask you how you think about assembly and association in a very specific way, because man, you've been a free ass dash for as long as I've known you, and it shows in your style, it shows in who you've been, it shows in your papers, it shows in the flow of your language. You really, I mean, like, you've prided your self-comfort for a very long time. And I mean that only as a good thing. I don't mean that as something we should insist against, right? And that you would turn in the direction of academia to find your piece and make your piece is amazing. But the question I want to ask you is, how do you think about the fact that you may, at any point in time, have to decide which of your accounts have to be private and which of your accounts have to be public for you to enjoy freedom? As a constitutional scholar, how do you think about your assembly and association in this larger context of our online presence?
I think one of the ways in which I try to conceptualize this is that, I mean, I guess we wear multiple hats, right, through our lives, and we have multiple identities, and they sometimes overlap, they intersect in interesting ways. And sometimes it's never really always possible to sort of like dissociate one from the other, right? So if I'm a constitutional lawyer and I'm in a class and I'm trying to teach students about constitutional law in a country, say, which is rapidly deteriorating or backsliding democratically, and so, I mean, how does one navigate that? At a time when your fidelity to the Constitution and fidelity to a particular mode of interpretation by our institution is no longer a given. I often think about how it is that one teaches constitutional law in these circumstances, and how. So, just to sort of get back to your question about how to disentangle these identities, I think it's very difficult. I think thinking about the public and the private and our freedoms, and it's a difficult question. And I think a lot of it has to do with our our sense of performativity, I guess, which again sort of like brings me to a very interesting podcast I heard with Gia Tolentino on the Ezra Klein show, where she was talking about how what happens to our lives when life is an endless performance. So I think that's a very interesting way of thinking through it. That how is it that we navigate our personal life through the lens of our professional life? What is it that we choose to make public? What are the sides of ourselves that we choose to show the world? And what good does, I mean, often when I think of activism, and when I think of the things that people share, the way that internet activism works, and how there are these radical ruptures from what activism was thought about in the past. I think some of the questions that we need to ask are ones that we haven't really even begun to conceptualize yet. So just this idea of what exactly activism means in today's world is again a deep question. So yeah, these are just, I didn't properly answer your question. I think I sort of like left you with more ambiguity than we started off with, but yeah. But I'm just sort of thinking through some of these things which have sort of bothered me, and that's just what I wanted to add.
Gaurav, this is so funny because, like, say 10 years ago, we could have laughed about listening to Gia Tolentino on a podcast and been like, oh, what a pompous prick. And here we are, making elite conversations at parties. And here you are reflecting on it in your day-to-day life. And I really admire that, because I value your opinion not so much for your opinion, but what is obvious to you. Like, you've always known that justice bends in that direction. So the what I'm hearing from you is also a concern raised by Sahana, who is a facilitator in one of these, and Ashwini, who was also participating as an expert in these sessions, right? Because the opposite of activism is passivism. If you just want to extend it, either you're too much of an activist or too much of a passivist. But the question for all of us, and I think going back to an Abhay and Vasu kind of imagination, is what does it mean for us to be an active pacifist or a passive activist, and how do you be low key and also free? And I think the answer is in memes, to be honest. Make memes, don't make wars, and you can be quite free. Make fun of people for quoting New Yorker podcast. Yeah, now we'll speak about this after the conversation. I don't want to delegitimize your academic authority on a conversation such as this one. But Abhay, I want to extend the same point that Gaurav was making right now to ask you how you think about the freedom of the body, because I'm looking at Gaurav's point really as a matter of freedom of imagination. And if you were to think about freedom for you, Abhay, I want to ask you more specifically, because coming to you and Vasu next, right? And Vasu, I'm itching to play a song on your behalf, but like, let's see how that goes. I'd love to close with it. I know we're running out of time already, but Abhay, both of you, I want to ask you to reflect on it from the perspective of your physicality, right? With Vasu, I know you've had to think about like threats to your body, it could be you've had threats to your body because of great joy, because fans get damn excited being around you. And you've had threats to your body because not everyone likes what you say. And in a certain way, when you say na no, na vu, na nalla, which means we and not me, you're reflecting back to this idea that your freedom is my freedom. And that's what the inevitability of this means. And I'd love to hear from both of you, not from the perspective of your art and your mind, but really the heart and the body and the physicality of your soul. So Abhay, do you want to reflect on that before we close with Vasu and some more Vasu, and just remember that there is only one Vasu and none Allah?
Sure, Badri. Thank you. It's a good question, and I'm not the best responder to it, because I'm often struggling to reconnect with my own body. Someone has suggested that one of my lower chakras might be blocked because I'm mostly in the mind space and not connected enough with my body. But that said, let me try and take that question on its terms and speak to it. So I think the body is actually a beautiful space within which the sort of paradoxes and contradictions of expression and its freedom come to the fore. And let's get really specific. Let's talk about drugs, or let's talk about self-mutilation. Let's also talk about suicide. Let's talk about placing your body in a dangerous zone in furtherance of a principle of yours, right? Four very, very concrete examples. And on each one of them, you'll find a constitutional theory being stretched to its limits. Let's work with the idea of drugs within scare quotes, and let's go with the most extreme form of drugs. Let's not go with something easy like organic marijuana, which some will say is not a drug. Let's talk about PCP or street crack, something that's hardcore, criminalized in most jurisdictions, and think of it from the perspective of the drug user, where he or she thinks and believes that it is a matter of his or her choice, and therefore a matter of his or her bodily expression to combine that drug with one's body. And the sort of societal response and the legal response to that is, I'm sorry, you don't have that expressive freedom. You won't be allowed to exercise that expressive freedom, right? When I think of this question, I am actually on the fence. I don't know which way I go. At one level, my respect for individual choice says, it's your call, do what you want, as long as you're not harming someone. And if you can demonstrate that you're not going to harm someone in and through the use of these drugs, it's finally left to you. At another level, not the harm argument is too simple. So let's just throw that out. In all cases, you're not harming someone. The other extreme would be that, no, you should not be allowed to express yourself in such a way, because your full expression as a human being, your ability to think clearly, to not be delusional, to also not affect how your brain or any human brain normally operates, is impaired by that. It's almost a paternalistic, your body is your temple and therefore you should not be allowed to defile that temple kind of argument.
Right. And you know, that it's funny that you say that in the middle of a pandemic, Abhay, because I've been thinking a lot that only the masked and the maskless are free, you know. Like many people have voluntarily been shutting themselves off, wearing a mask long before. And many religious traditions see this as well. And for you to reflect back on this from your chakras is interesting, because I have contemplated suicidal thoughts all my life. It's not new, right? But it's important for us to choose life, you know, and it's important to be on the side where you can insist on your continued flourishing in a collective kind of form. And I was hoping we could draw that back to Vasu right now, because this entire session has been reminding me of one of his most recent releases, which is actually a very old song, which Vasu wouldn't perform in front of an audience and found it fit only during a pandemic to release, you know, and almost as a meditation on the moon, and thinking about what it means for us to be unified under this notion of a we and not an I. And this is a song called Mola, but Vasu, we can play that as an outro. We really want to just like hear your thoughts on your notions of freedom, both bodily, from your voice, you know, and I come back to the body because with Abhay, if it's his mind, with you, it's your voice, right? But it's not just your voice. You're also someone who's plant-based and lives an existence which is remarkably kind. You love animals, and we think this is beautiful. So sing, speak, it's all the same.
Yeah. So more than Maula, I would like to probably end with this song called Nadi Olage, which means in Kannada, inside the river. This is actually a poem by Mamta Sagar, wherein she talks about our relationship with the environment, and what are we in between all of these. So she says that I see the reflection of the sun, the moon, the sky in the water. I see them. It's not just the reflection. I see them in the water, the sun, the sky, the cloud. And I take this water in my hand and I take them all, the sun, the sky, the cloud. I throw this water in the air, and in each drop, I see them, the sun, the sky, the cloud. And these water droplets fall on me, on my body, and they all fall on me, the sun, the sky, the cloud. I take this water again in my hand and I drink. I drink them all, the sun, the sky, the cloud. Now tell me, who is inside whom? Now tell me, who is inside whom? So I think that's what I believe as my relationship with my body and the things that around and what's inside my body. So you are in between everything, and everything is inside you.
Oh, that's beautiful, Vasu, because I'm really tripping on the idea that right now when you talk about, and it's funny to say tripping, right, which is a word which we associate with drugs and all things which are bad, or sometimes a nice journey, and often we forget that the journey is more important than the journeyman, so or the journey woman. So the idea that you would think about reflection both of constellations as well as water and finding balance is, I mean, I can't think of a better way to like close out this exercise. But, and for everyone else, because you're not going to sing Mola right now, we're going to leave the link to Mola in our comments so people can check it out after the video. It's really, I mean, like, because even that is about the same kind of principles, right? You could be singing any song, but your message is the same. That's what it seems when I hear you. So Nadi Ollege Vasu, and ladies and gents, it's been such a pleasure to have all of you. And Vasu Dixit, there's another evening for us.
ನದಿಯೊಳಗೆ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ತಣ್ಣಗಿನ ಸೂರ್ಯ ನದಿಯೊಳಗೆ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ತಣ್ಣಗಿನ ಸೂರ್ಯ ನನ್ನ ಬೊಗಸೆಯದೊಂದು ನದಿ ನನ್ನ ಬೊಗಸೆಯದೊಂದು ನದಿ ನನ್ನ ಬೊಗಸೆಯದೊಂದು ನದಿ ಮೇಲೆ ರಚಿದರೆ ಹನಿ ಹನಿಯಾಗಿ ಚೆಲ್ಲುವುದು ಮೇಲೆ ರಚಿದರೆ ಹನಿ ಹನಿಯಾಗಿ ಚೆಲ್ಲುವುದು ನದಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ಸೂರ್ಯ ನದಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ಸೂರ್ಯ ನದಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ಸೂರ್ಯ ಬೊಗಸೆ ನೀರು ಕುಡಿದರೆ ಕುಡಿದಂತೆ ಬೊಗಸೆ ನೀರು ಕುಡಿದರೆ ಕುಡಿದಂತೆ ನದಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ನದಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮೋಡ ಸೂರ್ಯನ ಆಳಕ ಯಾರು ಯಾರೊಳಗೆ
Vasu. Vasu, you're such a beautiful man. This, it doesn't even matter if you're a man or a woman or something. We'll all, like, the only thing that I'm taking from all of this is if you can't have light, at least be light and reflect something else, you know. If you don't know yourself, reflect something else that you love, and somehow whatever is inside you will reflect itself back. You know, it's been such a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, depending on wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us. And I mean that very, very sincerely to everyone who's joined us on the live stream, and not just our viewers, but all of you folk, Abhay, Vasu, Disha, Gaurav, Niyati, Rohini, Jaitirth and Ruhi, who've just been like sitting in the background, getting everything done, Lohit, Mel, from our team. We have a huge team which has made all of this possible. Gaurav's joined us from Budapest. I mean, it's like a lot of things have had to come together. It's nice to see your face again, Rohini. And we also lost Nisha to bandwidth issues, because that's how you lose people these days on Zoom calls. At least that's better than losing them in real life. We're never going to forget you.